All right, GM friends, and welcome to the future of gaming. You're listening to our weekly blockchain gaming rollup. We're recording on the 17th of June. You have Philip, Collins, Devin Becker, and myself, Nico. People have asked us to do a quick intro about ourselves because that makes sense. We have a lot of new listeners, so I'll go first. I'm most of the time an investor in blockchain games at Bitcraft Ventures. That's where I spend most of my time doing. And then next to that, I'm also a contributor at Navic, who is a stellar consulting and research firm who puts out great content. And I do what I do here, which is talking to smart people. So I host a podcast there. And then, I've been working on FogDAO now over the past months as well. And then, this is completely irrelevant for this discussion, but, I spend a lot of my time doing CrossFit as well. That's my sport. So in the mornings, I should be training right now, but I'm recording this 7 a.m. on a Friday because I love you, the listener, so much. So that's me, Devin.
I guess I'd rather be doing crosswords than CrossFit myself, but each their own. I am doing gaming lead or gaming analyst, however you want to phrase it, for Nami, which is doing a lot of like analytics for game economies. So kind of game economies, in-game design around them, generally kind of my specialty. Also doing a lot of consulting with that stuff, both kind of freelance and through Navic as well, and done some content contribution for them in the past also. So that's kind of where we know each other from. And just doing a lot of thinking and consulting about blockchain economies.
Yeah, great, cool. And I'm Philip Collins. I'm an investor at Convoy, which is a gaming dedicated VC fund based in the US. And we exclusively focus on platform tech and infrastructure in the gaming space across both traditional gaming and Web3. I've been spending more and more time in Web3 and continuing to dive into this space. So always excited to bring that context into these conversations with Nico and Devin.
Fantastic. Today we're continuing our conversation about YGG and Merit Circle that we started, I believe, 2 weeks ago. We're talking about Playful Studios' $46 million raise, Splinterlands dropping numbers, the Decentraland non-native wearables, and then if we get to it, we're going to talk about digital toys with the collaboration between Mattel and Cryptoys. And then we're introducing a small little segment, which is Try This Game. So, and I'm myself guilty of this. There's a lot of people talking about games that they haven't even tried. And so, from now on, each week, Devin or maybe someone else is going to suggest a game that we should try that has interesting mechanics, interesting, onboarding. I think, forcing ourselves to try more games and to get into these things is going to help us, understand the space better and, do our jobs better. Cool. Let's dive in. So YGG v Merit Circle, the resolution. Phil, what happened, man?
Yeah, for sure. So just to recap from the first episode, this is actually the first topic I think we ever talked about on the Future of Gaming podcast. A member of the the Merit Circle DAO submitted a proposal to remove Yield Guild games from the company's investment cohort because of a perceived lack of added value, which has been a very contentious thing in the blockchain gaming space, just as investors have competed for access to rounds based on the perceived additional value beyond capital they're able to provide. This was very contentious in terms of DAOs, how they operate, how they make decisions, and what it means from a reputation standpoint moving forward. And so that's kind of where we left that conversation off. It was very much up in the air. This situation was actually resolved, I think, much quicker than a lot of people expected, myself included, where since then, the proposal was actually approved by Merit Circle to remove YGG from the investment cohort. And that sparked some controversy within Merit Circle because of the implications of that decision. So what ended up happening was a counter proposal was formed between both YGG and Merit Circle, and it was a bit like a settlement to avoid a really complicated and weird legal argument. And YGG was able to get out at, I believe, 32 cents per token versus $1, which was the going market rate at the time that this was settled. So I think, I can go first just with the take on this. I do think this was kind of a dangerous precedent to set just in terms of a DAO almost upending a legal agreement. I think we'll see some some implications of what this means for investors' comfort level investing into these kind of structures. And I just think legal documents will be written and framed with this exact situation in mind moving forward. I will say, I think Yield Guild and Merit Circle both are coming out with their own respective wins and losses. I think Yield Guild was actually very fortunate to get some liquidity for locked tokens in a very significant bear market, and so they were able to cash out at a gain. And that being said, they did lose out on potential upside through holding over the long term, but they were able to get some liquidity early. Merit Circle, on the other hand, I think was happy to appease their members in terms of being very community friendly and going forward, at least semi closely to the proposal that was formed. But I do think the core leadership there is a little bit concerned about the reputational risk and damage that may come from this decision. So both came out a little bit on top and a little bit behind. I think I would say, if I had to choose a winner, because I'm an independent member here, I have no affiliation with either party, I would say YGG probably came out a little bit on the better end, just given that liquidity. And so that was my takeaway from this scenario, but definitely a very strange and I think semi-dangerous precedent for this DAO structure that we are going to be talking a lot about.
Yes, totally agree. I'm biased. We invested in YGG as Bitcraft. And so, I can't give too much color here. I think both organizations, this wasn't really positive for, as a net, wasn't really positive for either, I believe. And I definitely think that the consequences for Merit Circle from a reputational point of view are significant, right? I mean, not following legal obligations just because your community doesn't want to is a risky reputation to have. And in this world, no organization, no DAO is ever going to make it by themselves, right? You need to collaborate with others. And if you can't be counted on to collaborate because, once things become harder or become difficult and your members can be let's just get out of here and let's just start working with someone else. That's a very, very risky precedent to set. So I think, for Merit Circle, it's a bad precedent. And I think, for general DAOs, it also sets a bad precedent, because I think, if this would have gone through all of the legal, consequences and if they gone through court, etc., I think, I do think that's I don't think we would have seen the same result. I think, and obviously this is speculation, right? But it feels like YGG would have kept their stake. And so this settlement was likely just to avoid that and even more reputational damage. But yeah, it's not a great thing in general.
Yeah, and to that point, Nico, I do think the resolution here may have been very different if the market was in a different place, where the token prices has been on a decline. Liquidity is definitely coming at a premium right now, and I do think there may have been some more significant pushback if the doom and gloom wasn't starting to set in for a lot of people, and we may have been able to see what that legal precedent would look like. And honestly, I think that would have been really interesting. But yeah, it could have been very different in a different market environment.
Yes.
It's really interesting, just this idea of voting on what to do rather than following any kind of corporate or legal guidelines. It reminds me of these situations where, corporations do things that they know are kind of illegal and are like, oh, that's fine, we'll pay the fines and we'll deal with it later. And imagining the shareholders all voting on that. Yeah, let's just bury that toxic waste over there. Don't worry about it. Just all voting on it, it's fine. We all voted on it, right? So that's good. And the only check against that, right, is that shareholder meetings generally are recorded and stuff like that. So there's evidence. And maybe that needs to be something that is tracked with these DAO things, is how people voted and stuff like that, so that there is this sort of trail, so that people also have some accountability for their voting in these DAOs, right? Because that becomes the thing where we have non-doxed people and all that stuff, people voting with essentially money. So it reminds me of the whole super PAC thing and all that stuff in the US, and the way politics gets decided by a lot of this backdoor lobbyist stuff. It's going to get complicated. And that's what you guys are kind of hinting at, is that idea that, this idea of precedence and stuff like that, is that the more this steps towards regulatory stuff, the more it sort of pokes the hornet's nest of getting people to regulate, just like we're starting to get towards the point where the more stable coins fail and the more problems, the more governments are incentivized to try and regulate stable coins, stuff like that, right? So if DAOs start doing lots of mischievous things, then governments are going to start looking at DAOs of like, okay, well, we need to start treating them as more than just this anonymous group of people, following a Twitter poll. We need to actually treat this as like a serious organization. And I mean, terrorist organizations are still just organizations, right? But they commit violence. But it's like, well, if you're committing illegal things as an organization, maybe then you start looking at conspiracies, or it becomes, and I'm not saying it should paint it with those brushes, but that's the way governments tend to do things that they don't like, is paint them with those kinds of brushes and say it's these kinds of things, right? And so that's definitely a territory we need to avoid. And I hope that organizations looking at reputation, like you're talking about, kind of keeps them from doing that right away, because we're in this kind of cancel culture, mob, public, like viral attack sort of mode online, where if people do stuff, reputational risk is actually a lot higher than in times when they could just kind of get away with it with PR, right? Now you actually have to do a lot of damage control if you do stuff that's reputational risk, because you have Twitter mobs coming after you and stuff like that, that will make sure that people, if there's one thing about buying off the mainstream media or something like that, but now you have to deal with just mobs of like 4chan style attacks on you. I think this is something that DAOs need to consider for the future, is how do we manage our reputation in a way that we're doing relatively ethical things so that we don't have high reputational risk. But then you have the problem of, if you're following votes and you have a whole bunch of malicious people in your organization, or malicious people that just happen to have the majority vote, or, however you're doing your governance, you're going to have to start to go, do we veto that? Do we have rules? Like, how you have rules of clubs and organizations that say, as part of your DAO charter or something, if a vote goes in the direction of something illegal, then we can veto it, or something like that. Like, we have to start looking at these higher level structures of DAOs as guardrails to prevent these sorts of things. So this opens up a whole Pandora's box, right? Which is kind of what you guys were saying, but just kind of teasing at the different problems that come out of that box.
Yes. Curious to see, if we see more examples of this. I'm sure we will. I guess the question is when. So
out of our DAO, probably first.
Yeah, I mean, the mess that's happening in our Discord, it's terrible. A street trying to be voted out by the community. I don't know, next week might be 3 other people here, All right, let's go on to the next topic, and that is Playful Studios' $46 million raise. Devin, you want to give some context here?
Yeah, it is kind of interesting, because it's like, it was for Playful Studios, but they're like kind of doing it as part of like a division underneath, with a similar name to the game that they're doing. So, Playful Studios, the kind of thing that most people might know them for is like the leader comes from one of the 2 brothers that did Words with Friends. So that's a pretty well known thing. So that was pretty successful. And then a lot of the people on the team did a lot of stuff with other popular games, Age of Empires, Lucky's Tale, which was a big one in the VR/non-VR space, stuff like that. So these guys have like a pretty big reputation. So it's always a big deal when we see people that could potentially execute on games get funding, as opposed to people that are just like finance people coming into gaming or stuff like that. So these guys, raised a decent amount of money from Paradigm, who's been throwing around a lot of money lately. Hopefully after mostly successful projects. And this one is interesting because this is part of a trend that I think we're going to see a lot of in the future. And personally, I've seen a little bit behind the scenes as well, is games that have been kind of in development for a while, right? That have been kind of on the shelf. Maybe they haven't found, their stride yet, and they're still trying to figure out what they want to do with that game. Suddenly start to get looked at through the lens of, can we make this a Web3 game? And in the case of this game, which was an interesting kind of like hybrid of MOBAs and collectible games, like sort of this Pokemon, or I feel like it was the best combination of like Smite, which was kind of a third-person MOBA, and Clash Royale with the 3-lane and cards to play and a mana system. So imagine that kind of combination, but like with a lot of AAA flair and stuff like that. And the interesting part was that they've been working on this off and on for about 5 years. But what kind of clicked is the guy I mentioned before, Paul, who had I'm trying to remember how to pronounce his last name, but he was trying to figure out like I don't understand this Web3 stuff all that well, and then eventually like it kind of clicked with him, and then the part he hasn't really fully explained, but which I think is the interesting tease, is that he feels like it's rather than financial or NFTs or whatever, it's about this idea of like connecting to community and protocols, which I would think would be up your alley, Nico. That's definitely like something that seems to kind of excite you. So it's an interesting idea because they want to connect spectators way more to the game. And it doesn't sound like it's like a cheesy Twitch voting kind of thing like most people do for, we're going to make the audience play. Like, I mean, I guess, Jackbox, I think, does that fine. Like, they got that cornered. But they haven't really said exactly how they're planning on doing that, but that's their big supposed value add from Web3 is this connectivity to spectators, making it a spectator sport. So I thought it was all really interesting. Like they're definitely hinting that the collectible card aspect might be NFTs, but they haven't directly said anything about what Web3 aspects they will use. But they did mention the word tradable in relation to the card. So I'm hoping, personally, I'm a huge fan of collectible game design and trading card games, stuff like that. So it's that part's right up my alley. So I think it's overall a really interesting project, and I do hope to see more of these games where they have worked on the game for a while. They found a fun game. That's the other thing they emphasize is we've already found the fun. We're not trying to like shoehorn fun onto a play to earn game. We found the fun. Now we're just making sure we like work it all out, and then kind of in the pre-alpha phase. And then just these games of figuring out like, how can we integrate Web3 in a way that makes sense onto a polished game or a game that is polishable. And so I'm pretty excited to learn more, but it's been kind of just a tease with a nice, there was a good trailer put out showing off kind of the gameplay a little bit, some of the excitement of it. But it's like shrapnel when it first kind of was like teasing and you didn't really know much about it, and then finally dropped a whole bunch of info. I'm hoping we get like a white paper kind of thing in the near future. But very interesting project.
Is it confirmed that this game uses blockchain technology?
Yeah, I mean they've made it clear that the Web3 stuff is involved and something to do with blockchain stuff, and they're using Polygon. So they're part of the trend of a lot of these big games trying to use Polygon now. In fact, Metalcore actually just finally announced also that they are going to be using that because they hadn't announced the chain before. So I think there's a lot of ones suddenly kind of announcing Polygon. So hopefully we don't choke up the network, right? But, like Sunflower Land, right? But Nico, it's definitely Web3.
Nico, it was a Web3 game confirmed because they raised $46 million.
That's how you know.
Before anything was out.
Yeah, it was 4.6, maybe not.
Yeah, but I do think that's a really interesting aspect of this is we've started to see valuations pull back a little bit. Diligence processes are taking a little bit longer and are a little bit more intense. And so, Paradigm's a smart group of people. So I'm really excited to see what they saw in this because I do think the information right now is just kind of still in the teasing phase. And so we haven't seen it fully fleshed out yet. But I mean, a lot of these big projects that are really being sought after by the VCs that are knowledgeable about the space. I mean, there's something there. And I mean, I am excited to see how they're able to integrate the audience in a unique way. And I do think it's always really cool to see these really experienced game developers that have proven their ability to find fun in games and use blockchain as that tool. And I know that was a big topic last week is, blockchain is a great tool and, that is enough in a lot of cases. And so I'm just looking forward to see how this team of really expert game designers and game developers integrates blockchain in a creative way and, creates novel experiences outside of just the gameplay itself.
Well, here's the exciting part for me. If they pull it off, because they're integrating all the spectator stuff, that's a great way to spread Web3 stuff, right? Rather than saying like, go play this game, like they're straight up reaching out to people that are probably not going to be crypto natives if the game is like appealing in itself and incorporates the audience, and it might spread a positive message about Web3 for once instead of a Ponzi-nomic kind of negative message, right? And that's really what we need right now is something that's really embracing people in a nice way, like giving everyone a big group hug instead of like being that guy in the corner, like, hey, come here. I want to tell you about this Ponzi over here, kind of thing, right? So I think it would be a very positive change. Now we don't really know what the timeline looks like on this, so this could be years off still potentially. But yeah, I think we need this sooner than later in terms of positive impact.
For sure. And one thing that was semi-related to this topic that I thought was interesting was actually Polygon Studios' announcement of the 3 games that they brought out as new Polygon games. And a big part of Ryan over there's tweet was, these games are showing that development quality in Web3 is expanding and increasing, and the bar is going up. And I am curious to now see how the infrastructure layers like a Polygon or an Immutable that have been playing the land grab game of let's get all of the content on our platform and then let's get all of the users through that content are now maybe starting to select what they view as their winners, and just like, game distribution platforms have their flagship IPs. It's going to be really interesting to see if in a very distributed Web3 game environment, if these infrastructure layers almost are the not the publishers, but the distribution like the channels of sorts. Yeah. I thought that was really interesting where they highlighted this project. They highlighted Metalcore, which I have some context for as well, that fits into that category of really high quality, and Derby Stars, which I've also heard great things about just preliminarily. So yeah, I think that's an interesting trend to watch out for there, is as these high quality games are brought onto a certain chain or come to market, how they're treated differently than the long tail of content and the role of the infrastructure layers.
Going back to last week as well, this makes me think like, we have Supercell like killing off games left and right? What if, if they get a good taste of Web3, maybe they start looking at that graveyard of games going, you know what, maybe that game would actually work on Web3. And starting, because it's like if they've already got it pretty far along and like, it was into soft launch and they have enough metrics to know what they might need to change, maybe we do see some games exhumed from sort of the B-sides of some of these big studios that want to have something that they put on Web3 that doesn't take them 2-3 years to develop. And so they could focus on just the blockchain aspect of it, get up to speed on that, and then actually have something polished early. We're always telling everyone, just release a good game, and it'll be fine. It's like, well, okay, well, if you've got this library of good games that just couldn't find the market, and this happens to be a better market for it, then maybe we can have an onslaught of good games that, as long as it's not like a Thetan Arena kind of move, where they did basically that sort of idea, in not the best way, but it worked for them, right? They went from basically no one playing Hero Strike to like an insane amount of people playing Thetan Arena. So it certainly would get Supercell attention, right? If they just took one of their games that wasn't doing well, brought it out with Web3, I guarantee it would get downloads without them having to do any user acquisition.
I'm always very skeptical if someone comes to me and says, we've been building this, for years, and now, we see blockchain as an opportunity to, make this go mainstream or make this game better. In my opinion, I think, we've discussed this, blockchain is a toolbox. And I think it's such a new and unique toolbox that it feels like if you were developing something you think would work without Web3, it feels like this toolbox will not be able to or be optimally used in what you intended. And so I'm in general skeptical of teams that come to me like, oh, we were a Web2 game studio, we had this game, it was doing okay, but now we're adding in NFTs and this shit is going to go ballistic, right? That's I see quite a few pitches like that, and I'm often very skeptical of those. I think because Web3 or the Web3 stack is a toolbox, like I want to see a pitch deck, and this is a bit of my frustration. Like I see a lot of decks that say, we're going to bring Web3 to the masses, or we're going to bring the masses to Web3. That's our objective.
They all say that.
I think that's a wrong way of thinking, in my opinion, right? Because, why would your objective be to bring technology to people as a game studio? I think, give me a pitch and say, we're using Web3 to make the masses, to make this incredible game that everyone would love. That's what I want to see. That's a message.
Because they want a high valuation, and they can only say that after we're bringing it to the masses. Right.
Okay. Pro tip: come to me with I'm using the blockchain as a tool to make this incredible game. It's going to give you a higher valuation.
I mean, you're kind of reminding me of when people tried to take in recent case Diablo here, AAA games that are on other platforms that weren't free to play friendly, and trying to bring them to free to play. It's that same kind of idea, right? And obviously you can end up with the kind of the backlash that you get with Diablo, and I think you'll end up with some of the same thing with bringing them to Web3, right? Where you take one business model of kind of game and then bring it to another business model and try and adapt it. And sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. It definitely has worked in some cases, right? Like you take COD Mobile, it's pretty different than normal COD, right? Like Call of Duty. But they did find a way to adapt it pretty successfully, right? So like it can be done, but it's not easy, I think would be the important thing, right? Like if you come to Nico, you better have a good reason why you're doing that, and not just because it's hot right now, right? And I think we saw that with free to play and mobile. Oh, we're going to bring this to mobile. Oh, we're going to bring this to free to play. It doesn't always work out, especially if the audience expectations are a big mismatch there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I also don't necessarily want successful studios to bring their B and C tier content over because it's good enough and it's better than what exists in blockchain gaming today a lot of times. And so I think my concern there is just like, to Nico's point, I have a really hard time with content that's being just ported from traditional game to Web3 because it almost feels like they're just trying to breathe life into a piece of IP that maybe just wasn't working. And like I don't view blockchain integration as a way to breathe life into a game that can't stand alone. And so I've always been a little bit skeptical as well. I think we share that thought there when I see a pitch deck that I know is, this game's been for 4 years and we tried to release it and now we're re-releasing it with some changes. That's
and
tough to get hot.
This is why I'm so excited to see how this turns out. And when I say that, I mean like how they're integrating the blockchain. It feels, from what I'm seeing, that they had a successful Web3 game in the works, like a really fun game, and I'm just very curious to see if blockchain actually touches the core game loop, or if blockchain is just a way to involve audiences and stuff like that.
I think more the latter with this one, probably.
Yeah, exactly. And so that's, as you said, like that's the stuff that gets me excited, right? Where, you use blockchain either like as a core game element, and then you have to almost design it from scratch, or you can add it as an additional layer on top to involve to make for this asymmetric gameplay. That's a word I feel like I'm gonna say quite a bit in the future, where you have the players playing the game, but then you have maybe the audience that can influence the arena or something like that through this blockchain technology, which I don't know, that could be super interesting. So I'm very excited to see how this turns out and how they're making use of this. And this makes me think a bit about Miles, massive interactive live events, where what was the thing? There was like a survival island where the audience actually together controlled the participants. It was like, so you had like 10 AI bots. What was the name? I forgot the name. This is something like we talked about at Navic. We did the like a deconstruction.
You're talking about the one that was on like streamed on like Facebook or whatever. And
yes.
Yeah,
yes.
I played that a little bit when that first came out. That was a very interesting experiment.
Yeah. And so, having something cool like that, I feel like we're going to see more of that with this technology, independent from like core game loops. But still influencing the game. Anyway, that's let's see what they bring up this game. It looks really good. Like wildcardgame.com. Have a look. It's a lot of scrolling, which I don't like. Right? It's like
I don't like the scrolling to do animations. That's frustrating, especially on like mobile and stuff like that. Like, please stop doing that. Whoever's doing that out there, just make me click on something if you want to animate. Just do it.
Yeah, it looks slick, but it's really annoying. All right. Next point. Splinterlands numbers dropping. Devin, you did a lot of research here.
Yeah, it's something I didn't see covered anywhere, but I kind of stumbled on it when I was trying to explore why the users were dropping in general, and related to something I'd covered before, where the Splinterlands reward system was changing pretty drastically. And I thought it was, it was interesting because their plan around it, so to give a little bit of context, was that it's a game that, because it's transactional in nature in the gameplay and stuff like that, and it's very on-chain, like most of the game is on-chain, like it used to be entirely, but most of it still is. It's very easy for bots to participate in this game, right? And so rather than fight the bots in the sense of like, let's just try and constantly kick them off, that's kind of a losing battle. And something that you brought up, recently in one of your other podcasts, Nico, like, just that keeping people awake at night sort of thing. It's a real big problem. So rather than fight it in that sense, they wanted to say like, well, how can we just make sure in the typical Web3 fashion, incentives align and all that sort of thing, so that if bots are going to participate, which we're not going to like wholeheartedly fight, we're going to make sure that they're participating in the game economy in a meaningful way and being part of it in some way and contributing. So what they did is they adjusted the way rewards worked across like a broad spectrum of the reward systems, so that basically if you're playing with your starter cards that you get, the non-NFT cards, you get like no rewards. And so the rewards scale based off of how many non-starter cards, so how many NFT cards you're using. And what was an interesting effect is right after that went live. So that went live June 1st. June 2nd, the player count dropped like half almost. Like just boom. And so I think now we're probably gotten a lot closer to the real player count. And I imagine there's a mix, right? Like some of it might be bots that haven't got the memo yet. Some of it might be players dropping off as well that just don't like the reward system, stuff like that. Because it's the start of a new season that runs every 2 weeks, every 14 days. But what was interesting is the kind of cascade of side effects that happened based on what they did. Because the way bots worked, interestingly, was bots would generally rent cards to build up collection power, which was a gating mechanism to basically kind of gate behind spend to which rank you can get to, so that your rewards are sort of gauged to your spend, which is awesome because that's a system that, scales a lot more reasonably and isn't so Ponzi-nomic, right? So, because of that, bots would rent a bunch of cards, but they weren't playing with those cards so much. They were renting them to have them in their collection to build up their collection power so they could get to the higher ranks to get to the better rewards. But because they changed that system around, and bots were mostly playing with starter cards because they were playing around a bunch of the restrictions. I won't get too much into the detail, but it ended up in the situation where they're not playing with a lot of the cards they rented because they're not renting cards strategically where they're saying like, these are good cards. They're just renting cards that have high value, like gold cards and stuff like that, so that it boosts their collection power easily. And so as a side effect of this, now they're not earning hardly any rewards because they're playing with mostly starter cards. And they have to adjust like all the bot logic, how it rents, all that stuff, completely revamp the bots to adjust this new system. I don't think the Splinterlands team completely anticipated the side effect, but it's also affected the rental market, right? Because the bots are not renting now because they're pulling out. And so like it's this really interesting cascade of events that sort of did what they intended. Like, I guess, hey, if the bots weren't going to participate, they left. And so I don't know how long this will last or how much of an overall effect it'll have on what I personally think is the most sustainable blockchain game at the moment, just in terms of like overall design being a lot more reasonable and basically proving it over the last year or so. It's a very interesting setup that did prove that there is some ways to disincentivize bots while still also aligning it somewhat to player interests. But as a knock-on effect, I did see that some of the new systems did sort of also push out players who aren't super competitive, players who aren't super engaged in the game, that find it too difficult to earn now. And maybe that's a good thing, maybe that's a bad thing, right? Like depending on what kind of players you want, right? If you just want players that are there just to kind of mindlessly grind for the earn, and you want to get rid of them, like that did that as well. I mean, that's kind of bots, right? Bots in human skin, I guess, at that point. So it's really interesting as an overall experiment in how do we deal with bots, and one that technically worked but had its own side effects.
It feels like it's still a win, in my opinion, because it feels like both bots and players that will stop if they don't earn enough are like by definition extractors from an economy. And so disincentivizing people or bots that, are net extractors feels like a good thing. And I understand that maybe, some people that had invested a lot of money because they had very valuable cards that would then be rented out and who were making money that are now, losing out or having a lower return on investment. I guess that this is like they're like it sucks for them, right? But feels like it's more sustainable and I'm curious to see if the bots return once they figure out like the new logic of both renting and playing. Let's see.
Yeah, I mean, it feels like botting got harder to do well, and the people that were unhappy that their passive income mechanism was being disrupted just kind of gave up, put their hands in the air, and left. And so I do think that probably did rid the game community of a lot of value extractors. And so I think I always view that as a net positive. And I do think the value extraction mindset and the passive earning mindset is very much like a Web 3v1 approach that I'm kind of personally glad is going to fade out over time a little bit. I just think that's counter to what we always talk about, where fun games are what we want here, and we are aligned with the people that hate the space that we're talking about right now. And so I've always struggled with passive earning and kind of yield farming as a meaningful objective in blockchain games, and I think that's something that the outsiders of this space really hate about it. And I think that goes hand in hand with the like blockchain games aren't fun. Like, what are you talking about? This whole idea is stupid. And so I always kind of like when the passive earning mechanisms get pushed out, and I do think it maybe shows that of the several million blockchain gamers that are out there, there truly are a lot of them that are here for the passive earning or the earning mechanism more so than the fun. And that, 150,000 person drop overnight is indicative of that, because that is a sizable amount of the TAM for this part of gaming right now. So I always view it as kind of a net positive when passive earning gets trumped for active players. So yeah, I don't know if that's a hot take, but that's
well, the nice thing is it's basically doing what it's probably supposed to, which is aligning skill with earning.
Yeah.
Right? Like whether you're in esports or you're whatever, like, and you don't have to do it like, because there's two ways to align skill and earning, right? You could do it like a leaderboard style where it's only top X people, right? And that's a very exclusionary way of doing it, and that's kind of what like Axie was trying to do in their pivots and stuff like that. Whereas this isn't an exclusionary way of doing it, right? It's not saying like, because even Ice Poker is still kind of that model with the leaderboard system and stuff like that. This is instead saying like, you can still earn plenty without being a top player, but your earning is still going to be implicitly tied to your skill level and your how much you contribute to your own play. Like, how invested are you in the play part is how much you're invested in the earning part. And that's really what it should be, right? Like, is that you? And that's the funny thing is like, we're always like looking at this idea of how do we make earning work in a way that it isn't just about grind, right? That isn't about time grinding. And it's like, well, you compress the time grinding and instead make it off of skill development, right? That's something that you can continue to build on yourself. That's not just a time. I mean, yeah, it's going to take time to develop skill, but the idea is you're being rewarded by your personal investment in a game. And in a way that's not a financial personal investment, it is a personal development, personal interest, and something that hopefully helps you grow, in some ways as a person, because you're developing a skill and learning new things and hopefully making new friends and all that, yada yada. But I think it's a good way to go about it that I hope more games like, because the way Axie did it was just kind of chopping off limbs, I feel like, to try and stop the gangrene of inflation basically at that point. And this way is saying like, you know what, let's just get rid of the people that don't really care anyways. And the nice thing, Splinterlands was always kind of a game that was more about the game than it was about earning. Earning was never high in the game. Some people did pretty well, and it had a nice like sort of positive cycle that if you were good at the game, you could continue to earn and get better stuff and work your way up. And so it was like basically what it is supposed to be, I think. At least in my opinion, like it seemed to align with the values that we wanted for play to earn, but haven't been able to accomplish. So hopefully this is a good model going forward if it sustains, right? Like we're only halfway through the month. We literally just finished that first season. And of course we saw like a spike at the end of the season because of the way the rewards work. But I really want to watch this kind of player count over the next, like, say 2 months and see what that does to it. Now, keep in mind, I have no way to discern who's bots and who's not. So a lot of this is a little bit speculative in terms of me saying like, hey, this big drop was probably bots. There's no conclusion. You don't see Splinterlands coming out and saying like, this was bots. It's like literally, making a bit of a logical jump, but I think one that is very logical to assume. And I think a lot of the public around the game concurs that this is the most likely thing, especially some people who are somewhat familiar with the problems the bots are running into right now.
To be continued. Interesting. All right, next topic. Decentraland's non-native wearables. Tell us, Devin. What's up with that?
Yeah, I'm always a big fan of the whole idea of interoperability, as I think we all are if it's done right. And this was an interesting case of it. Now, metaverses are positioned to be doing this, I think, earlier than others, partially because they don't have the same kind of game-based economy that could be disrupted as easily. You don't have the same level of concerns. And you're also trying to be an interoperable thing, right? By being a metaverse, whether it be Sandbox bringing in like 1 million licensed things through partnerships, or ones that are just trying to look at like, hey, let's take some PFPs and other NFT projects and integrate them. And so the way that Decentraland did it, because of course at this point Decentraland needs attention, so it's a good thing for them marketing wise, is they I don't know, I'm not sure if they partnered with Satoshiverse on this, but basically there's a Satoshiverse NFTs, and so in Decentraland the custom NFTs that people can make and create as part of the sort of user-generated economy are called wearables, which, as their name says, are generally semi-cosmetic, but they can also be used for functionality in games, like gating into things like the way ice poker is gated off wearables to play. And so they made it so that basically you get a wearable in Decentraland that's not a normal Decentraland wearable, meaning it's not like a tradable within their economy, so it doesn't disrupt their economy, but it's still pulling in that NFT that you own into it. So it's this sort of interesting way of bringing an NFT across without really making it an NFT in game. And I think this model is one that's, replicable for a lot of things out there. And I think a lot of projects are looking to do this kind of idea, but it was a good demonstration, I think, from Decentraland, and assuming, this sort of thing carries forward. And it, obviously projects like Other Side would be looking at stuff like this, right? Obviously they have the ones that they purchased, that they own, that they can integrate directly, but I think they're looking to do the same idea. And so this will be a great proof of concept for a project that's bigger, to see if this scales and to see if there's any effect on, say, does it drive people to buy Satoshiverse NFTs? Does it influence Decentraland's economy or interaction in any way? Does it bring over Satoshiverse players into Decentraland? These are all things that we're hoping cross, game NFT stuff does. And so now we have a live experiment to see.
Can you talk a bit more about the exact difference? So I have a Satoshiverse shirt, and the token gate happens when I enter Decentraland, and that's when the game checks that I actually own it, and then I can wear it inside the game, but it doesn't influence anything else. I'm not sure how you
get it. I don't know if you just automatically get it, because I haven't had a chance to try it out. I don't own any Satoshiverse NFTs, but I imagine that it possibly shows up in your inventory, something along those lines, if you have those, and if it's in your wallet that's connected to that.
So you have it, yeah, okay, yeah. And then you can wear it. That's my assumption there. So you could equip wearables, right? So I assume it's a wearable that you could actually equip as a cosmetic. But again, I'm not a huge Decentraland player, so I've actually tried it. But then, what are the limitations of this case? So you can't trade them, you can't be token gated because of them, because they're not truly NFTs.
Right. So normally NFTs in Decentraland, right, are NFTs, right? You could take them out of the game, you could trade them around, you could give that to other people. Whereas this is a case where it's not really minting another NFT. It's more just displaying an NFT you own in the game. And so I think it's the safe way to do NFTs basically across games without, and it's I assume if you don't have that NFT anymore, meaning you sell the Satoshiverse NFT, that you will no longer have that wearable in Decentraland as well, that it's dynamically tied. I always think it's interesting, the idea of though, how often it checks. If I'm logged in to Decentraland, I put on that thing and then I go trade the NFT while I'm still logged in. At what point do I lose it? Do I have to relog back in and stuff like that? I think it's an interesting problem, and maybe it's not really a problem, right? Maybe no one cares. But you could have, let's say you could have a theoretical thing, right? Where let's say, assume no gas fees, right? In this theoretical model. I put this Satoshiverse thing on in game, and I stay logged in. I trade it, or I give it to my friend. He logs into Decentraland, puts it on, and then trades it to someone else, and so on and so forth. Then all of a sudden, everyone in Decentraland's wearing that one thing until we log out, right? Obviously that's not a big disruptive thing, but I think it's a funny use case for depending on when you check, and the fact that it's not minted in Decentraland. So I don't know, interesting use case. It
could be abused. If it has utility, right?
Right.
So there must be, if it's not that, we will need some checks for that specifically, for sure.
Well, imagine there's just a Satoshiverse club that you can only get into if you have that, right? That would be an example of utility. Sorry, go ahead, Phil.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say, and I think that's a big, the abuse part is a big reason why it's not an NFT in Decentraland. It doesn't have properties. It's not an asset in and of itself. It's just allowing you to use the visual of an asset that it knows that you own. And so I think you're a little bit protected there. I mean, maybe the risk of abusing it is the fact that it's no longer unique on that platform, but you're not going to get your NFT swiped because you have it activated. I do think the one thing with interoperability, and this is something that I harp on pretty consistently, is the fact that I don't necessarily view interoperability in and of itself as particularly interesting unless you have a suite of interoperable experiences that are independently compelling, where, if I can use an asset in experience A, B, and C, if experience A, B, and C all aren't good experiences, then it gets me less excited. And so I don't know if like just the simple fact of being able to use the asset across 3 not that great experiences gets me particularly excited. So I think that's something that I'm always looking for just in terms of interoperability is, is it being used as a value proposition in and of itself, or is it truly a way to enhance already good experiences? And so I think that's sometimes where I see different levels of depth to interoperability more broadly. And so I am curious to see how that works with Decentraland, because I do think there is another layer of depth by token gating experiences. But I think they also need to make sure that Decentraland has the compelling experiences that makes people want to show up and use those assets in the first place.
Yeah, I mean, based off of what I've seen kind of behind the scenes, I think this sort of style of bringing it over, whether be bringing over PFPs as like in-game profile pictures or just being able to display or avatars, like this is a tiptoe way to do it. And I think we will see this a lot more often because it's a great user acquisition play, right? It bridges communities. Mm-hmm. And I think right now, the way Web3 is about communities, I think it's a useful thing, right? Like the more we bridge people together among all these communities and like keep people kind of tight knit. It reminds me, like, again, of the early days of the internet where everyone was like kind of, there was such a small group of people on the internet. It was kind of tight knit and like everyone kind of like was very positive and contributing. And I think, it helps build that positive vibe again as well. Like we're not competing with each other. We're all like working together to show how cool Web3 is. I think it's a while before we get to the abuse part of things and things start becoming more problematic. But I do think we will see this a lot more often. And Decentraland is like, just one of the many that will be doing projects like this. And I think it's cool because, we have all these stupid JPEG NFTs, right? And we're like, oh God, what do we do with these dumb JPEGs? Besides right clicking them. And this is something you could do, right? And I think adding utility also is a good way to help dismiss some of the huge negativity about the craziness we had basically over the last year about NFTs. And I think NFTs overall as a technology are really awesome, but they can be used poorly, right? But this is because interoperability also is something that like everyone's like talked about, like, oh, imagine if you could bring that sword to this other game, right? And everyone goes, that's stupid, that'll never work. But like if we start to actually kind of demonstrate ways it can work, I think it's good to make good on our promise. If we're going to promise all these things as crypto bros to the general unwashed masses, that we should be able to deliver on some of it, right? Even if it's maybe just a small amount of what we said, like just proof of concept, and then feel it out from there. Work from there, see what works, see what doesn't. But I'll stop there because I could probably talk for like 10 hours on interoperability at this point. So
no, it's a good point. It's a short term. There's a short term perspective and a long term perspective, and those aren't necessarily contradictory. They can be additive.
It will take a while before it gets abused. Famous last words by Devin Becker.
Right. I give a while meaning like not today. That's it. That's the time. Well, in crypto, a day is it's so long. So
it's like you don't know people on the internet, sir.
You only have 48 minutes left in your day.
That have found a way to make financial gain by doing something immoral.
Oh no, absolutely. That's half of what I'm doing as economic consultant, is being like, these people are going to break that, guaranteed.
Yep.
Kind of thing.
Yep. All right, then finally we're going to talk about some crypto toys. Devin, Mattel and Cryptoys collaboration. What's that about?
Yeah, I mean, this is another cool thing where they're just like, these companies, we're seeing a lot of like brands move in, right, into metaverses and stuff like that. And they're trying to figure out like, what the hell do we do in these, right? Like what you got like a bank branch in Decentraland or something. It's like, okay, it's not exactly an exciting use case, right? And you've got this idea of kids now growing up where they don't play with toys the same way, right? You don't have the same level of like just using your imagination with your action figures and playing with them and stuff like that, right? And I think NFTs are an interesting like concept that sort of aligns with that idea of like having this sort of figure or toy or collectible or whatever, right? So this is along the lines of that Decentraland thing in a way. And we've seen attempts to try and bridge that into the digital world, right? For the digital native kids that grew up on iPads and stuff like that. And we saw that with like things like Skylanders and, Disney Infinity, stuff like that, where there was attempts to try and bring that stuff across. And we're even seeing it with like collectible card games, right? Where they're trying to like, have hybrid ones where you have like physical and digital equivalents. And so this idea of trying to bridge, old style toys into like, the digital native world for kids obviously you can't just be like, oh, you have this NFT and you can display it on your shelf, right? Like Mattel's not going to care about that, right? Like, I mean, for, brand recognition, sure. Maybe they have like a little digital toy store and you go there and look at all the toys, but that's a pretty weak, that's like 90s images of, virtual world malls and stuff like that. So what they're trying to do is actually try to make it a much more interactive thing, right? They want to make it so that you can play with these toys. And so, play with toys is a tricky thing because in real life, right, you're mostly using your imagination to imagine what the toy is doing, right? Whereas in a digital space, like, articulation doesn't work the same way, for example, right? So you have to figure out, you take something like Skylanders, it was like play with your toy means like use it in this third person action game or whatever. And so what they're doing is trying to build experiences around the toys that are like little games and things like that. So they're kind of directing the way you play, but they're still at least, letting you play with your digital toy. And I think, as we move forward in the future, and of course, once we're all living inside the metaverse and no longer have physical bodies and stuff, we'll need some digital toys. But this is bridging that gap. And I think this stuff is cool because maybe it's kind of clunky and silly right now, but as with the digital interoperability thing, like this is just small bridges, towards this idea of like how do we make it fun to be in the metaverse, because metaverse interactivity right now is pretty weak. Right? Like in terms of like you can walk around and you can chat. And it's like, well, we could do that 30 years ago, no problem. Like that's not new. Like we're not doing anything new. But then when we start to say like, okay, now you could take things that you own and bring them with you into the metaverse, that starts to become interesting. And that's some of the stuff we promise with this Web3 stuff, right? Is by being able to solve the double spend problem, we try and solve the double physical problem, right? Of cloning, like, cause Skylanders, people just sell now like discs, for amiibos and Skylanders on eBay that are just the NFC code, right? Like this stuff happens where you have cloning, but in solving the digital or the double spend problem, now we can start to try and apply that to physical things to give your ability to bridge things in a way that isn't dealing with the information duplication problem. And it's not solved yet, don't get me wrong, but I think it's really cool. I like this idea of Mattel embracing it instead of, just making like say, okay, we'll just make a bunch of dumb Barbie iPad games. They're like saying, hey, let's continue to keep pace with where kids are going to go. And I mean, obviously that's for their own financial interests. I'm not saying they're benevolent to here, but, it's a cool way to bridge the future, I think.
Mm-hmm. I think, I really like the idea of digital toys, and I think this is one great use case of the blockchain. And I'm going to have an interview coming up with a founder who also embraces this very strongly, but I don't want to spoil that. I think what we'll see here is I think these digital toys will need a novel type of utility. And so for that reason, I don't think that players like Mattel will be the ones like winning in the space. I think they will probably license out their IP to people that actually can build some really cool stuff with their toys and their brands. So, I just looked up because I didn't know what games Mattel had or what toys Mattel had. But so you have Barbie, Hot Wheels, Fisher-Price, American Girl, which I've never heard of, and Mega, which I also never heard of. Anyway, so these are some
stuff
of
with the Hot Wheels as well. Previously, like they tested the waters by selling some Hot Wheels NFTs that went really fast. So like they definitely appeal to collectors as well.
Yes. So, but I think so. I'm thinking who's going to be the winner? Like who's going to be the Mattel of Web3, right? And so I feel like it's going to be more Web3 native, where the companies that will win are now being founded.
It'll be Goblin Town or something.
Yeah, those guys, man. Anyway, but I'm very excited about this. I'm curious to see how this ends up and what we can learn about this concept of digital toys. But I do believe it has a bright future. Cool, Phil. Any thoughts here, or should we start the logging off here?
Yeah, and I'll be brief. I think one of the interesting things here was it is an interesting demographic alignment between what you think of when you think of like the Barbie and the Hot Wheels age. Of course, there's nostalgia with people of all ages, but that age demographic that those brands have historically been known to target, and then adding in the Web3 layer. And I think it is exciting to think about Web3 being so seamlessly integrated into the future that those demographics actually do align at the younger end, where there's not the complexity of bridging the physical and the digital, and it truly is, as seamless as Web3 being in the back end. So I think that's something I'm really excited about, and I'm interested to see how that works out in the short term for these brands. I do think, like you mentioned, there's going to be the collector audience in our age demographic, for example, that will compete for these, but I think that would be a great future for Web3 if you are able to have 6 to 10 year olds have their NFTs that they're able to bridge between their physical and digital lives.
100%.
Yeah, I think Sandbox is also just demonstrating a lot of trying to help these brands bridge that sort of thing by creating experiences around the brands rather than just, slapping a 3D model somewhere and calling it done. And so I think maybe even Sandbox and Decentraland are just long gone by the time this concept reaches fruition. But there's a clear business alignment in pushing this forward, as well as consumer interest eventually. Maybe it's not there right now with the age demographics, but I think it aligns everyone's interests, right? Like the businesses can make money off this, so they're going to want to do it. The kids are, if that's where the kids are, they're going to want to do it as well. And it's like, like you said, Nico, it may not be these brands, but this is like somewhat of an inevitable destination, I think. And maybe it'll just be a game company that does it, like Skylanders was, right? Where a game company suddenly making toys. And so it's just going to be whatever catches fire, right? At the right point.
Yes. And I think the fire will come from utility or something cool to do instead of something cool to see or something. Or like, as you said, like you're not going to display NFTs on a shelf in your house. You're not going to hang out in the house. You're going to want to do shit, right? So
I don't know. Zuckerberg said you're going to want to. He's got the new home stuff. You're going to want to hang out in the house.
Yeah. And when the Zuck says something, we got to listen, right? Because I don't know. All right. Let's round this off. Devin, you promised us a cool game to try. So what's it? What are we going to play?
Right, we're going to start this off with Training Wheels because I'm amazed at the number of people in this space that haven't played Splinterlands, and I think it's one of those like foundational ones like Axie that maybe it's not the future of the games, right? Because it's very transactional and stuff like that. But I think it still does a lot of really interesting things from the economies, the rewards, the general game design, and being a game that's adapted to the blockchain by taking a traditional genre of collectible card games and taking a very blockchain twist on it. I think it's required reading, essentially, I think, for a lot of digital natives. And if you haven't played it, especially now that the reward system has changed and all that stuff, if you want to experience what we were talking about, and hopefully with less bots to play against, so you might have a harder time. Let's be honest, the bots aren't as good. So you probably have a little bit of an uphill battle, but I think it's worth playing. And I think everyone should, again, it's one of those like classics. And I think there are quite a few sort of classics, like there is in literature, that I think are good to do. So yeah, we'll all try and, we'll do some more progressive ones as we go here, but start off easy.
Fantastic. Awesome. All right. Well, listener, thank you for listening. Devin, Phil, thanks for this. It was amazing. And so, listener, if you want to join us at the FogDAO in our Discord, you can find us at thefutureofgaming.wtf. We have some exciting stuff coming up. We already teased the NFTs that we're working on. It's actually not an NFT. It is, well, it is an NFT, but it is a soul-bound NFT. So each of our core and active members will receive a soul-bound NFT that is looking absolutely amazing. Make sure to try Splinterlands. And yeah, this was our weekly roll-up, and we look forward to speaking to you next week. Ciao.